A newborn is crying in a shelter made of mammoth bone. Its mother is weak. Her milk hasn't come in, and outside, the temperature is 30 below zero. In the modern world, this baby dies within days. But this isn't the modern world. And what happens next reveals one of the most overlooked survival secrets of the entire Ice Age. You've probably never even thought about this question. And honestly, that's exactly the problem. We talk about mammoth hunts. We talk about fire and frozen rivers. Nobody talks about the most fragile creature in the entire Ice Age world, a human infant, and the gap that opened up every single time a mother's body simply couldn't feed it. Because milk failure wasn't rare. It was a constant, quiet threat sitting inside every single birth. So let's kill the first myth right now, because it's a big one. People assume breastfeeding just worked every time, automatically. It didn't. Milk can come in late. It can fail completely. A mother can die in childbirth, and in a world with no surgery, no hospital, that happened constantly. When it did, there was no formula waiting on a shelf. There was only the cold, the crying, and a group of desperate people who had to think fast or watch a child die in their arms. Here's how serious this actually was. Scientists studying hunter-gatherer populations estimate that a staggering percentage of children never even saw their first birthday. In some environments above 30, even 40%. Sit with that for a second. This wasn't some rare edge case. This was one of the central, ongoing battles that decided whether a family's bloodline continued on or ended in silence. So if milk failed and formula didn't exist yet, what actually happened? For decades, nobody had a real answer. Bones don't talk. Soft tissue doesn't survive 20,000 years. Then scientists started looking somewhere nobody expected. Not bones. Teeth. And here's the part that genuinely sounds like science fiction. Teeth form in layers, almost like the rings inside a tree trunk, and each one of those layers locks in a chemical signature of exactly what a person was eating and drinking the moment it formed. A single baby tooth from a child who died 20,000 years before anyone wrote a single word can tell researchers, almost month by month, what that child was actually fed. A tooth becomes a diary, a silent little diary, written in bone, waiting patiently in the frozen ground for tens of thousands of years just to finally be read. And when scientists finally read it, some infants showed exactly what you'd expect, a clear, steady signature of breastfeeding. But others told a very different story, a signature closer to animal milk, or a soft, processed food given far earlier than any modern parenting guideline would ever recommend. In other words, when the plan failed, your ancestors already had a backup. And that backup plan is really the whole story here. The first solution was wet nursing. Another lactating woman in the band would nurse a child that wasn't biologically hers. Think about what that actually required. It meant a group of women whose cycles overlapped closely enough that more than one might be nursing at the same time. And it meant something deeper than logistics, a kind of trust most of us can barely imagine today. The trust of handing your child's survival into someone else's body, someone else's arms, someone else's love. But wet nursing wasn't always available. There wasn't always a second mother nearby, healthy enough, willing enough, ready in time. So there's a second solution, and honestly, this one is where it gets truly inventive. It's called premastication, and it sounds strange, maybe even a little uncomfortable at first. An adult would chew food themselves, sometimes meat, sometimes fat, sometimes soft plant matter, softening it slowly with their own saliva, breaking it down until it was almost pre-digested, and then feed it directly into the infant's mouth. Finger to lip, mouth to mouth, however it took. It sounds strange to modern ears, sure, but an infant can't chew. An infant's tiny gut can't handle raw, tough, fatty food straight off the bone. Premastication turned an adult's own body into a living bridge, quietly transforming grown-up food into baby food in real time, using nothing but patience and love. And remember what fat actually meant out on that frozen steppe. Fat was survival itself for the adults. It was the thing standing between a full body and a slow, frozen death. So it only makes sense that the very substance keeping the entire band alive through the brutal winter became, in a crisis, the exact same substance keeping the newest, smallest, most fragile member of that band alive too. There's even evidence pointing to a third option. Other lactating animals used as a desperate emergency milk source when nothing else was left. Nothing, absolutely nothing, was left untried when a life hung in the balance. Now picture the actual scene, because it's worth slowing down here. A newborn crying in the freezing dark. A mother too weak, too depleted to nurse. And instead of panic, instead of chaos, a coordinated, almost rehearsed response. Someone runs to check if another nursing mother is close enough to help. Someone begins softening fat between their own teeth by the fire. Someone else feeds the struggling mother the richest, most calorie-dense food they have, hoping her own milk still has a chance to come in. This wasn't one terrified person improvising alone in the dark. This was a system, quietly refined over countless generations, activated instantly the moment it was needed. And that reveals something pretty profound about who these people actually were. A human infant, more than almost any other newborn on this entire planet, is completely dependent on a whole network of people, not just its mother. Scientists have a word for this, alloparenting, meaning care that comes from someone other than the biological parent. And it might be one of the oldest, deepest patterns in the entire human story. The band shared the weight of keeping the smallest, most fragile lives alive, together, without question, because that's simply what being part of the group meant. Every single person watching this right now exists because somewhere far back along their bloodline, a crisis exactly like this one was solved. A mother's milk failed, and instead of that story ending in silence, someone chewed fat between their teeth and fed a dying infant in the dark. Or a stranger opened her own body to a child that wasn't hers, asking for nothing in return. None of that had to happen. Any single one of those moments could have gone the other way, could have ended differently, could have ended everything. And yet, somehow, here you are. This is exactly where that tired old myth of the cold, brutal, every person for themselves caveman completely falls apart. A society that lets its weakest starve, that lets its infants die when a solution clearly exists, doesn't get a next generation. It just doesn't. These tiny fossilized teeth tell a very different story. One of intense, coordinated, deeply human care, extended toward the most helpless members of the group at real cost to the adults who gave it freely, without hesitation, without keeping score. So the next time you picture an Ice Age human, don't just picture the hunter gripping a spear, muscles tense, eyes locked on a mammoth. Picture the quieter scene happening just beside him. Someone softening fat between their own teeth for a child who isn't theirs. A whole camp, quietly, without ceremony, without anyone saying a word about it out loud, deciding together that a stranger's baby was worth every ounce of the sacrifice. That's the real answer to the question we started with. What did an Ice Age baby eat when there was no milk? Whatever the group could find a way to give. Not because it was easy, and it never was easy. Because letting that child die simply wasn't something this species was willing to accept 20,000 years before anyone ever wrote down a single word explaining why that mattered so much. And that instinct never really disappeared. It's still sitting quietly inside you, right now, whether you've ever noticed it or not. Every single time a community rallies around a struggling new parent, showing up with food, with time, with an extra pair of hands, you're watching an Ice Age survival strategy play out in a warm, modern room, and almost nobody in that room realizes how far back it goes. Because feeding a newborn was only ever the first danger these children faced out there on that frozen steppe. Even after that crisis passed, one more test was still quietly waiting for every single one of them, the very first solid food a toddler would ever put in their mouth, and getting that wrong could be just as deadly.